This is Anisa Zad interviewing AM on the 12th of March 2018. She was born in 1982 in Bulgaria and migrated in 2003. Can you tell me a bit about your family history?
I was born in a small town just in the countryside in southern Bulgaria. I come from a really small family. It's only about, I've got a sister and a cousin and one aunt, really. My mum was adopted, so I don't have any relatives. Well, apart from my adopted grandparents, I don't know anybody else from her side, and her adopted cousins, but they're not that many. Yeah, my dad has got a sister. Kind of the way it worked. The story I know is that Bulgaria was a communist country then, so everybody was equal, but not really. You can't erase class. So what I know is that and from what I remember seeing as well, is that my dad's family were middle class, and my mom's family were what they used to call them the peasants. So yeah, kind of working class. What else do you sort of want to know about my family?
What about their occupation?
Occupation. So my mum and dad got married really, really young. So they've worked in all sorts of things, mainly because I came out, and then that's why they got married, really. And then they had to go back to school together to finish their secondary education. So that mostly worked in the construction industry. Eventually, sort of from a labourer, became a ventilation technician. Now he works the fields and has a factory job. And my mum, so she worked in retail for a long time, and then she became a hairdresser, and now she's training to be a radiographer. So she should be working as a radiographer, hopefully summer and in the summer this year or end of this year. Yeah.
So can you tell me a bit about your childhood experience in Bulgaria?
My childhood experience. So I grew up in a very small agricultural place, a town of 5,000 people. It was beautiful, actually. We didn't have much supervision outside, mainly because everybody knows each other, and all the kids kind of hung out together I remember from like being 5, 5 or 6 maybe, would be let outside to play with. It'd be kind of like on the street, it'd be everybody from like the age of 5 until the age of 15. So it didn't really matter if you had an adult or didn't, because we looked after each other. The elderly children would look after the young children, and obviously if there are any problems, you would run home and complain, and then your the grandparents looked after us. The parents went to work, they'll come out and resolve the situation. It was beautiful. I grew up in an amazing from up until the age of 9. I grew up in an amazing place where I didn't know what bullying was, and I didn't know what not having anything to eat meant. And I grew up in a very privileged sort of place, and a household as well, up until the age of 9. And then we moved to the city because my mum wanted us she didn't want to live in the small town anymore. So the idea was always to move to the city. This is where I learned what bullying is and what not being accepted means, and not being able to find your own place. And and that carried on, and it kind of still carries on, because once you once you move from your own community, there is never really a settling down story. I mean, there is, but not as if you never left. So we ended up moving from place to place, because we didn't have a place of our own. When my mum and dad saved money, they decided it was better to divorce. So we kept moving, and then when I moved to the UK, I was 20, so that I kept moving, and I'm kind of still moving. Oh no, I am still moving. Anything else about my childhood, more sort of in particular from what I said?
Can you tell me about your primary school experience in Bulgaria?
I changed about 3 primary schools. The first one was great because it was in the small place. We start school at 7, by the way, first grade. So this is when you learn how the alphabet and how to read and write and count and that sort of thing. But obviously in preschool you kind of prepped for that. I grew up in the first primary school. I was there for the first 2 years. It was in the small town, really nice. Again, we walked to school in big groups of children of all ages. Then the second school was the first school in the second city, which was okay actually. It wasn't too bad. It was okay. And then I think we were there for 2 years. So 1989, 1991, I was in the first primary school. 1991, 1993, it was the second, which was okay. 1993, 1994, we moved neighborhoods. So for half a year, just one term, I went to a really horrible school where both my sister and I were beaten up regularly, just for, I don't even know. I don't know about my sister, because at that point we stopped being friends. We were really good friends up until the age of when I was 12, when puberty hit in. I was beaten up because the boys liked me. So I was beaten up by elderly girls. So it kind of all crosses over. So I started athletics in the second primary school, in the first school in the second city, and then I carried on doing athletics in the horrible school. And then when we moved back to the neighborhood where I started my second primary school, and started my secondary education there in the same school. So I carried on athletics, and then I moved to another school because I don't know why I wanted to move to that school. My sister was going to that school, to the school I wanted to move to as well. Didn't last long, only about half a year, and then I was basically asked to leave, otherwise they were going to expel me. I think this is the right word. And the reason, I don't really remember why. I think it was, I wasn't a particularly quiet teenager at school. I think by that time I'd had enough of all the bullshit in the city and that I couldn't deal with. So then I moved to another school, which was amazing, and I stayed. So that's my third secondary school, from 13 to 14, so for 2 years. That was an amazing school, great teachers, great principal. They understood everything about, my behavioural problems and why and what, and helped me a lot to to stay in class, do well, and then to progress onto my higher education. Was the question about my primary school or just everything? And then basically I used to have a stomach problem. So I used to be in hospital once a year from the age of about 4 or 5, which also didn't help with all the moving and everything. So my stomach was getting worse as we were moving schools and places to live and trying to get used to the city. So because of my stomach problem and because of our sort of history of moving from place to place, the principal of the last secondary school where I actually finished my secondary education basically helped me get into school, into my sort of, because the way it works is you have primary, secondary, high school, college, university. So it's slightly different in the, you finish secondary school at 14 and then you progress to high school from 15 to 17 and then you can leave school. So yeah, because of my stomach problem and the fact, I moved so much and I didn't do well in school, I was able to apply to study anywhere I wanted without exams, without any sort of. So I did that, and I went to a cookery school from the age of 15 to the age of 17. And that was really good, really, really nice people. Really nice people, actually. I got on really well with our head teacher, who used to give me a lot of responsibility. I used to be in charge of the registry. And I used to be in charge of sort of collecting all the documentation of anybody who didn't turn up and why they didn't turn up, and we all got on really well. Really, really good class of 28. That was actually really amazing. Very, very good experience. Then I finished school in 2000 when I was 17, and for about 2 years I didn't really because I went to a vocational school, so I didn't have the necessary sort of grades and subjects to progress further. So I started working mainly in sort of restaurants and cafes, and then McDonald's, and then I went on and basically I decided to go back to college, and I wanted to go to university, and I wanted to study primary school teacher with English, but because of the score I had from high school, it was impossible for me to get in. Even if because the way it works back home is that you go to uni, but to get to uni you have to pass an exam. You can't, it's not like here you write a statement and you get a few references. You have to sit an exam regardless of the subject you're doing. So I sat an exam, and even if I did, even if I scored the highest score, I wasn't going to get into the subject I wanted to study, because I didn't have the subjects in my high school. I didn't do certain subjects in my high school, and therefore I didn't have the points to get into what I wanted to study. And then my mum suggested accountancy in a private college. I don't like private schools because especially colleges because, well, I don't know how it works here, but especially in Bulgaria, it's quite a corrupt place. So I kind of thought, this is bollocks. I don't want to be paying money to go to school and study accountancy, because I didn't want to study accountancy. It was something I never crossed my mind. However, my mom convinced me, and I remember that was a really good experience again, because I went to meet. My mom convinced me by making me meet the head of accountancy. So we went to meet her, and it was really funny because my mom said to me, "Don't behave, don't say anything wrong. Just listen to what the lady has to say." And I was like, "Okay, okay, mom, but I don't want to study accountancy." And I was not really 20. I was probably, because I left the country when I was 20, so I was 19, and I was still like, "Oh, I'm tired of this, of all of this." So I then remember meeting this woman in this small room, and she was like, "So your mom told me everything, that you don't want to study because you don't like maths, and you never did well in maths, and so on." And I said, "Yes, and I don't want to be an accountant. I don't, it's not something I want to do." And then she said, "Well, maths, it's not going to be a problem, because accountancy is not about mathematics. In fact, on the every exam you have, I'll let you guys, everybody in the classroom, to use your school books and your notes to do the exam. And I bet you, if you don't get it, you wouldn't be able to pass, even if you have everything at your disposal to look at." I was like, "Okay, that sounds good." So yeah, so I got in, and in fact I really enjoyed it. It was really nice. But then a friend of mine came back from the US, so in Bulgaria, back in sort of, I think it started early 90s with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the communism. The West, as in the USA, Ireland, the UK, I'm not sure about Germany, came up with those schemes where you would have they would employ, well, not really, they would they came up with the student schemes where they would get students from Eastern Europe to go and do, in America, in the UK and Ireland, was farm work, all sorts of different, like, farms and fruit picking and animals and so on. In America, they used to also employ Eastern European students at theme parks. So a friend came back from America. He was working in a farm, yeah, and he had been to the UK as well. So he was like, "Hey, he was telling me all about it," and I was like, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm a student now. Oh, I can try." And the other thing was, I obviously didn't want to be, although I did well doing accountancy, I didn't want to be an accountant. So I was like, I can escape my accountancy studies. And I was having way too much fun back home, drinking, taking drugs. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to escape and kind of start clean. So this is how I ended up coming to the UK in 2003.
So how were your journey? How was your journey coming to the UK?
It was really interesting because Bulgaria was not in the European Union, so we needed visas to get into the UK. And it was interesting because it was, looking back now, it was such a crazy, basically it used to be this, I don't know, like hundreds of us, like 100 at least each day outside the UK embassy in Sofia, the capital, queuing to get in to get our visas with all the documentation. You know, you had to have a lot of documentation to prove that you study, that you actually have a job, you have your flight return ticket, and so on. So they didn't want the reason why they wanted students from Eastern Europe was because they didn't want us to stay. They wanted us to do the job and go back home. So we waited 3 days outside the embassy. I can't remember actually if we stayed overnight or if I went back home. I don't remember, but what was very interesting at some point, because it was different companies who were running the scheme in Bulgaria in collaboration with 2 British companies. Oh yeah, so I was accepted to come to the UK, and it was only 2 companies doing it, collaborating with agencies in Bulgaria. And so after like a 3-day wait, after a day and a half wait, someone came out from the embassy and said, we're not going to have individual people walking in anymore because it's too long and it's taking too much time. Can we just have one person collect all the paperwork and walk in? And somehow I ended up being that person who collected all the paperwork and walked into the embassy, handed it all in, waited until it was checked, left, and then the next day in the afternoon we all got our visas and they called me in. I got the passports, like a stack of passports. And I was literally handing out passports to to a lot of students. And I met this girl in the agency when we were accepted onto the program to come pick strawberries in the UK. And we basically stayed together. As in, she was from the north, I was from the south. So we met at, when we had to do the paperwork and visas, and then we decided to fly together. And I knew nobody in the UK. I didn't speak English, and she was the same. Well, I thought I didn't speak English, but when it came to having to speak English, I did pretty well, which was very surprising. So for me, it was surprising. So, yeah, we ended up getting a flight on the 2nd of June 2003 from Sofia to Gatwick. My uncle's uni mate was already living in the UK. Exactly, he arrived in the same, doing the same scheme. Some of us obviously stayed behind, but so we were 500 people from 11 Eastern European countries in the farm. Only, I would say, 10 stayed behind. Everybody else went back. But anyway, so my uncle's friend was like me. He stayed behind, and he was the person who helped me get a legal status in the UK, who basically did everything he could have done to help me not stay illegally in the UK. I forgot the question.
What was your first impression of the UK?
Oh, that's really funny. So my first impression, we arrived in Gatwick and I thought, whoa, that's different. And then really the first impression was like, right, so what I see in movies is not very different from how the West looks like. But obviously I saw Gatwick Airport, then I saw Victoria Station, and then I was on the coach to a place in the countryside, a really posh place in the countryside. And the British countryside is so tidy and so beautiful that I was like, yeah, that's like some sort of a Western movie. And then we arrived in this really posh place, and you see this big houses with massive gardens, front and back gardens, and the front gardens are like amazing with the plants and then the red phone box and the red post box. So I remember me and my friend looked at each other going, where are we? What sort of Western movie is this? So that was really the very first impression. And then I'll never forget when I decided to stay and move to London. I was like, okay. I couldn't believe the poverty. I couldn't believe the class system. I couldn't believe, because obviously you cannot erase a class system. It still existed back home, but it wasn't so pronounced. Whereas here, I was like, okay, where you know, like, how does this work? And also, one other thing for me was the I could not believe that there were schools for girls and schools for boys only. That does not exist back home. And I thought, how weird and bizarre is this? How are boys and girls going to learn about each other? How, you know, boundaries, what's allowed, what's not allowed. If they're not mixed, you wouldn't know, you know. So I still find that very shocking. Yeah. What else? I still, yeah, because back home we go to the same schools, same kindergarten. It's all mixed. It's all, and then, yeah. Yeah, this is kind of the most sort of shocking bit for me.
So when you came over to the UK, what happened next?
So I stayed in the farm I stayed in 2 farms for 6 months, and then I had an agreement with my uncle's friend that I would not go to London unless I have £1,000 saved. We're talking 14 and a bit years ago, 14 and a half years ago. So with £1,000 you could have, you know, you would have then been able to rent a room and have enough money to find a job. So yeah, because I wanted to stay, so this is it, I wanted to stay. So my family knew I wasn't going to go back. Yeah, so what happened was I started so I went to London with but basically my uncle's friend said, this is what I can do for you. I can tell you how to do your paperwork so you stay in the country legally. I can tell you how to get your national insurance, how to apply for a tax reference number, because I could have only applied for a self-employed visa or a student visa, but student visa I needed money to pay for the school as well, which was not possible. And the easiest way as a female was to apply for a cleaning business, sort of business visa that you would do you'd be self-employed cleaner, which didn't require money. It just required a very clever business plan, which my uncle's friend showed me how to do. The difficult part was I had to wait for my visa. I didn't know if I was going to get it. So the difficult part was where I actually had to work illegally in order to be able to pay my rent, keep an address so I can receive my paperwork, and eat, and be able to, you know, survive. But that didn't last very long because I got my visa and then I started cleaning, because that was the only legal job I could then do. Yeah, so then I lived in work. So then I figured out that I can work as self-employed and in catering. So then I cleaned for 2 years, and then I started working in catering. and kept applying for visas because I could only have 1 year visa, then 3 years visa, then another year, then indefinitely leave to remain, and eventually a British passport if I wanted to. So I kept applying for visas, kept working in catering. And then when I got my indefinite leave to remain, I was already a student. I started studying photography and digital imaging, and in West London. And so I had my indefinite leave to remain by then, and then I worked in retail, and did worked in retail and did internships while I was at uni with I worked in a camera shop as well. I worked in Jessop's, and so I did 2 photography internships, and then unfortunately shortly after I started uni, I had a breakdown, which was not very pleasant, and it took a while. To recover, but I didn't stop. I stopped going to uni for half a year only. But what was really good is that I kept going through my breakdown and uni, and only took 6 months break, and still did really well at uni. And then I then moved from. I kept moving from place to place in London, and as the rent started going up, I found this guardianship scheme where you live in empty properties that could be anything from office buildings, schools, churches, old people's homes, halfway houses of all sorts, that were in between sort of stages of either the owner didn't know what to do with the place, with the building when the lease had expired, or the people renting it didn't know if they wanted to carry on doing what they were doing or not. So those places became places in flux. And back then squatting was legal and private in private buildings and commercial buildings. And so to prevent squatters coming in, they had empty property guardians in. So that was us. We paid a lot less, half of what the real market price was, and occupied really bizarre places, which was very interesting actually, but it's also quite damaging in the sense that you live. I personally think that the place you live affects your mental state, and sometimes you would walk into a building and you see blood on the wall and you have to clean it. If it was like a homeless hostel or a halfway house, which I've lived in both. I used to live in what it used to be homeless hostel and what used to be a halfway house for people. I can't remember whether they were coming out of a mental health institution or prison. But it was just, so and it was interesting. So, you know, what made it very good and interesting was that we were, my first property was a halfway house in Wimbledon. Just on the outskirts of Wimbledon village, really rich place. We could hear, we lived in a mansion house. We could hear the clapping from the tennis courts. It was funny. And it was 18 of us living in this really bizarre mansion that So the history of that place was incredible. It used to be it used to be owned by some lord or earl, I can't remember what now. It used to be used in the Second World War to as like a hospital type thing. And then it was taken by the NHS, or I don't know who runs the halfway houses. And it was a halfway house for a really long time, and then we came in to guard it from squatters, and now it's converted into a luxury flats, of course. And then I went to what used to be a homeless hostel and lived there for 2 years. That was a really bizarre building in Shepherd's Bush. Again, hidden behind all the houses on the front row. You wouldn't know it existed if you didn't know about it. It used to be great that we were then in that place. We were 25 people, and everybody had 2 rooms to themselves. It was amazing. I met so many amazing people. We had such a great time. And then I finished uni eventually. I was that so it's 2 years, and then I moved. I lived in Brixton for a year and a half in a housing estate, council housing estate. A really interesting place again, a place that people, the residents, have been fighting to not let be gentrified. So when we arrived there, the fight had been going on for 10 years. And when we started arriving, the Guardians, there was a lot of there were a lot of problems between us and the residents, because they knew we were Guardians, and they knew so they didn't really hate us, they just hated what was happening. But unfortunately that created I was shouted at and called an idiot, and I'll break your head in if I hear any noise coming from your flat, and which was very disturbing. I moved into the flat on my own. Anyway, I got some friends to live with me in the end. But it was just it was very interesting being there. Now the place is nearly finished, and well gentrified. I think I left that place in 2013 September, so they're still finishing it up. And then I went on to I was in Portobello Road for a month, and this is where I had enough and started fighting for my rights, because you lived in really, basically we as Guardians mostly lived in unlivable conditions, as in you had to walk into a really horrible place, clean it, put in all your furniture, completely empty, not even a fridge, not even an oven. Sometimes if you're happy, if you end up in a good place, you might have facilities, but usually not. And in Portobello Road, can't even remember why I was. Oh yeah, they were owing me money, which they weren't giving me back. And when I asked them to give me the money back, they said, "Oh, we'll charge you £25 transaction fee," because the Guardian company. So the bank account is Dutch, because it was a Dutch company who set it up in London, and I was fighting my case, and then in the end that was my mistake, but it worked out really well. I stopped paying my rent, and because I stopped paying my rent, I was like, all right, I'm not paying you rent. Well, it's not even called a rent; it's called some sort of a licensee fee, because I signed a license, a Guardian license, So what happened was I was afraid it was, yeah, so where I was living was damp. There was no hot water. So the last place was really horrible, and this is where I started kind of trying to fight for my rights. But in reality, I had no rights because you signed these licensing agreements, which basically tell you have no rights. You can be kicked in within 24 hours of receiving, like you can be asked to leave within 24 hours if it has to happen. And so I stopped paying, and like I was like, can somebody come here and sort out the hot water and everything? It's so because I stopped paying and because I was pushing too much, I was evicted. I not physically, but received an eviction letter on 23rd of December 2013, telling me that if I don't leave within a week, I'll be bailiff will come and kick me out. So I thought, right, I had enough. I rang my friends in London. I scattered my belongings in 4 different places, went to live with a friend. That obviously really affected my mental health, and I then also, that was the time when I thought, oh, there was a new restaurant opening on Portobello Road, and I thought, oh, I'll see if I can get a job there because it's right next to home. And there were many problems at the place. I was the new girl, so there was a lot of, I was scapegoated in a way that I couldn't believe it can happen. And obviously being evicted and then the scapegoating and everything, I felt really depressed. And my way of coping with the situation was to go back to cleaning, because when you clean, you work for yourself and there's nobody, you work with the clients, but if you do your job right, there are no problems. So I cleaned for a few months in London, and then through the cleaning, I became a nanny, a live-in nanny. I loved being a nanny, so I was a nanny for about 9 months altogether, to different families. I would have loved to stay with the first family, but I didn't want to be a live-in nanny, and they didn't want to have to pay for a live-out nanny because it's more expensive. So I then found another family, but 3 months worked for them for 3 months, and then I realized that it wasn't the right family for me to work with, because there are many different parental styles, and I just couldn't agree with theirs. And then this is when I decided nannying. I love children. It's great working with children and their parents, and but nannying is such because of the many different parental styles. I thought it's better not to, because you cannot know from 3 interviews how things would go, and there are children involved. And for me, looking back at my childhood history, I thought, no, children need consistency, and I just didn't want to be involved in. So then I thought, right, it's super expensive. By this time, end of 2013, if I wanted to live in London, and I already lived everywhere in London apart from Northwest. I know the place really well, and I knew I wanted to live in Lambeth, South London, and the prices to live there then and now I think it's £600, the excluding bills, sort of average, just the rent. And I thought, no, I can't do this. And then I moved to Birmingham. And the reason why I moved to Birmingham, it's because I have one really good friend here. And I was very stubborn. I didn't want to ask my friend to help me move. So, because it was a challenge for me to leave London where all my friends were. And I just started, well, not just, but, I was already speaking English well, relatively well. I was enjoying London. I was having a good time. and then I had to leave. And also I wanted to challenge myself. Can you move again into a new place, not knowing anybody, the way I did it moving to London? Well, knowing somebody, but not really. This time around I spoke English. I knew I can find a job. I knew I can work anything apart from selling my body. So and I did it, and it was very difficult, actually. In fact, a lot more difficult than moving to London. And it also resulted in another breakdown, because I pushed myself way too far. And yeah, here I am, still in Birmingham 3 years later.
So can you tell me a bit more about your moving to Birmingham?
Okay, so the reason why I chose Birmingham was because, I said already I have a really good friend, but also it's in the Midlands. It's in the middle, it's the second city. It's really easy to get to London, where I still most of my really good friends are there. And I tend to go back there quite a lot. Right, so I used to visit Birmingham. That also helped me decide to move here. And I liked Birmingham. I actually really liked the industrial feel to the city, and the diversity, the many different communities that live here. Basically, where I come from, Bulgaria is not particularly open to Muslim people. We do have a Muslim population, actually, left from the Ottoman Empire, but we're very segregated, and I personally wish things weren't like that. I personally wish we were more mixed and accepting of each other. So when I first came to Birmingham, I had never really seen a big concentration of women with covered hairs, and with wearing the hijab, I think it's called. And so for me, that was quite new. It was very new. It was also I just thought it's beautiful, but because of my, we are kind of born as a white Bulgarian, you're kind of born to not like the gypsies who have brown color skin. You kind of brought up not to like the Muslim because of what they did in the Ottoman Empire. And I always fought with that internally and questioned externally as well, questioned people, but why and what things need to change, we should know our history, but then we should be able to accept and overcome and come together. Because of my internal fight, and one reason was I wanted to live in a place where there were Muslim people, and of course everybody else, but it was just that I wanted to be surrounded by Muslim people. I didn't want to be separate from them anymore. And in London, it's quite it's quite separate. It's people mix, but again, Londoners is a different story. Local people everywhere don't really mix with newcomers because they already have their own community, they have their own friends, family. And in my sort of view and perspective is that, and from my observations, it's that it's difficult, you can only have so many friends, you can only give so much emotion to people. You have to also preserve yourself. So I personally don't really like to say, the locals are so this and this. No, people, and we can only do so much. What I found is for me, Birmingham was very challenging because there are not so many people from all over the UK, whereas in London there are. And so I left my community within a year of arriving in London, which was very difficult. And the reason why I left my community was because I wanted to learn English, I wanted to mix with people, I wanted to learn about people from different backgrounds, from different countries. That was my agenda for leaving. When I left Bulgaria, I wanted a clean start, but I also wanted to learn. And I wanted to learn about people and cultures. And so in Birmingham, I found that other people speak more, they're friendlier, but because there isn't, I don't know how to explain this without sounding horrible, but I found it much more difficult to make British friends in Birmingham than in London. But what Birmingham gave me is, now I have Brummie friends. It took me a while. I also have friends from different cultural backgrounds, which I love. Birmingham, living in Birmingham, gave me the opportunity to just sit back, not rush so much, because in London you're constantly rushing to be able to pay your rent and eat and everything. Birmingham allowed me to just sit back and work on my photography website, my photography business, which is family photography, and on my art website. And then that also allowed me to apply to study what I wanted to study, which is art therapy, but it didn't work out well because I couldn't raise. I did 3 weeks of the course and I realized that it's too intense for me to work 6 days a week, 3 jobs, and go to uni 2 days and then have the time to study, have the time to just have some space for myself and meet people. But yeah, I'm still here, and I like Birmingham. Sometimes, unfortunately, when I get frustrated with life, I blame it on Birmingham. But Birmingham is a good place, and yeah, I hope I stay here. I hope I don't move from this place anytime soon, because I really like my house, the house I live in now, and I get on with my landlord, and now I have good people around me, and do you want to ask me something about Birmingham?
Would you consider yourself a Brummie?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, it's a bit much. I mean, I don't consider myself. I consider myself a Bulgarian to an extent. I have a British citizenship, so I consider myself a British citizen. Not a British national, because I am not. But yeah, a Brummie. No, maybe if I lived, I don't even consider myself a Londoner. And I lived there for 12 years. I've been here 3. Yeah, maybe if I live another 20 years in Birmingham, I might consider myself a Brummie. I don't know. I hope I wasn't too negative about Birmingham. In fact, I was honest, and it feels nice to be honest. And I absolutely love seeing women in hijab. It was a bit shocking at first, but now I'm like, yeah, if this is what you want to do, I support you 100%. And yeah, and I'm really glad that I can, I can mix and I can learn about not only Islam but other religions and cultures. I'm not sure if I can separate culture from religion. But yeah.
What does it mean to you to be a Brummy?
Okay, so community. I mean, me personally, I can't identify as Brummy yet. Hopefully, one day, maybe. But how I see Brummies is that very community orientated. A lot of amazing grassroots organizations. People trying to make a change in every possible way, which is very difficult to see in London because it's a massive place. I'm sure the local people have, do things, but it's such a big place and you can't see it. But here it's in your face, and I love that. I love the fact that people try to mix, and there's a lot of sort of grassroots organizations that actually, I'm not sure if I can say, organizations that try to bring different people from different communities together to do things together, whether it's to celebrate Eid together or I don't know, Christmas, for example, the German market, food initiatives, art, community art projects, a lot of them, which is very, very good. So it's yeah. I think for me, being a Brummy, yeah. Let's all be part of something together.
How does it feel to tell your story?
It felt good. I was worried about being honest about, the fact that I come from a fairly Islamophobic place. Not everybody is. I'm generalizing, but so I thought, so that didn't feel good because it's not. I wish things were different. Yeah.
What impact do you think telling your story would be?
I hope my story. I hope people listening to my story would be able to, I don't know, kind of see why Eastern Europe might be, well, okay, I can't speak of the whole of Eastern Europe, but at least some Bulgarians might be Islamophobic. And it's because of the Ottoman Empire, and also the media doesn't help all over Europe. We hear all sorts of not very good things about Muslim people, and I just hope that mentioning this in particular will somehow, I don't know, make people see both sides. Also, I don't know, like moving a lot from the age of 9, changing places in the same city, and then changing countries, and 2 cities in the new country. It's I don't know. I hope people who have never moved can gain a better understanding of what impact moving has on every aspect of your life, in a positive and a negative way. The positives are that my mind is more open and I accept a lot more than I would have if I stayed back home. And the negatives is that the negatives, not only like moving to a different country, but just the whole moving thing has a mental health, a negative mental health impact, I would say. Yeah, I think that's
And can you tell us how to say Churi movement in Bulgaria?
the Tsav движение.
Thank